Hello, and welcome to Snooze History. Now I know you want to know why Vikings slept better than you, so let's get to it. I know you've heard the stories. The Vikings, terrifying warriors, sea raiders, beard enthusiasts, and full-time chaos consultants of the medieval world. They sailed from icy fjords to distant shores, wielded axes like they were extensions of their emotions, and, if we believe half the monks who wrote about them, had a personal vendetta against monasteries. But tonight, we're not following them into battle. We're not shouting over the storm, or dodging a sword, or running a small coastal village PR campaign after a raid. Number. Tonight, we're doing something much more dangerous. We're talking about how they slept. The same people who turned monasteries into matchsticks also had to find their cosy spot by the fire and whisper, "Good night," in Old Norse, of course. And that, my friends, is where our story begins. Because behind the legend of blood and thunder lies a quieter truth. The Vikings might have actually been some of the best rested people in medieval Europe. They had no screens, no city noise, no endless notifications from Odin.com. Just firelight, cold air, and the occasional existential dread of being smited by Thor. Let's step inside the longhouse, breathe in. It smells of pine smoke, wet wool, salt, and roasted fish, the authentic Viking candle collection. The air is thick but comforting. The walls creak like old ships, and the roof beams catch the light of the central fire. All around, people move in slow rhythm, not chaos. Children curl against their mothers, warriors loosen their belts and boots, and the family goat just stands there, judging everyone equally. This was no Airbnb experience. Privacy? None. Soundproofing? Laughable. But there was warmth, community, and the kind of peace you only find when everyone's equally exhausted from rowing across the North Sea. Now, not all Viking beds were created equal. Your social rank decided what your spine would be resting on for the next 8 hours. If you were a chieftain, congratulations. You slept on something resembling a mattress. A wooden frame lined with straw or feathers, and maybe, if you were lucky, imported linen sheets from England. That's right. The same island they raided for gold and glory also supplied their bedding. History has a sense of humour. If you were a farmer, sailor, or just some guy named Olaf the Unremarkable, you got straw, moss, or wool. And if you were really unlucky, you got the corner next to the livestock, which was technically warmer, but also came with bonus smells and late-night mooing. And yet, somehow, they all slept, deeply, peacefully. While we modern humans, with memory foam, blackout curtains and soothing Viking sleep playlists, can't even manage 6 hours without checking our phones. You pay $4.99 for crackling fire ASMR? They had the real thing, plus a snoring uncle, a gossiping grandmother, and the goat mentioned earlier, all at once. Surround sound, 100% organic and powered by barley stew. Modern science calls it environmental harmony. They called it Tuesday night. Their homes were built for warmth and unity. The longhouse wasn't just shelter. It was a living, breathing system. The fire in the centre burned day and night, carefully maintained so the smoke rose through a single hole in the roof. The result? A low, steady heat, and a gentle haze that probably made everyone mildly drowsy and slightly smoked, like salmon with anxiety. And though the air was thick, it was familiar. That scent of soot and sea and sweat told them, "You're home. You're safe." Not bad, considering this was the same crowd who thought bathing twice a week was showing off. Picture this. Outside, wind lashes against the wooden walls. Inside, shadows dance on the rafters. Someone hums an old saga softly under their breath. A dog stirs in the corner. There are no clocks, no blue light, no endless scroll of Viking talk. Only rhythm, fire crackle, breath, heartbeat, silence. They didn't schedule sleep, they surrendered to it. Their night wasn't divided by deadlines. It was shaped by the sun, the seasons, and the hush that came when the world decided to rest. Imagine if we slept like that again. If our rooms smelled of wood and rain, and our last thought wasn't, I should check my notifications, but the fire is still warm. Now, I'm not saying we should all move into a longhouse, but statistically, Viking sleep quality was probably higher than ours, and no one had to count sheep. They slept next to them. Now before bed, Vikings didn't just collapse like we do after a Netflix binge. They had rituals. They'd tell stories, sagas, filled with gods, monsters and legends. Sometimes funny, sometimes terrifying, but always rhythmic like waves. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were lullabies for the soul. By the glow of the fire, they'd murmur names of ancestors, whisper charms against bad dreams, and trace protective runes into the air. A small hammer of Thor might hang over the bed, not for decoration, but for safety. Because in the Norse mind, dreams weren't just dreams. They were doors. To fall asleep was to cross into another world, one where gods might visit or the dead might whisper warnings, and still they slept. Deeply. Because fear didn't stop them from dreaming. It gave their dreams meaning. If you're imagining silence, you're wrong. A Viking night was alive. The wind outside, the fire's low crackle, the creak of wood adjusting to the cold, the soft sound of snoring and distant waves. It was like the first sleep podcast ever recorded, except everyone in it had strong opinions about axes. But here's the thing. Modern research shows that consistent ambient sound helps people fall asleep faster. And wouldn't you know it? The Vikings had mastered that before white noise machines were cool. They didn't design their lives around productivity. They designed them around rhythm. And rhythm is nature's lullaby. To the Norse, sleep wasn't laziness. It was strength. A warrior couldn't fight without rest. A farmer couldn't reap without dreams. A poet couldn't remember his verses without silence to hold them in. Sleep was sacred. And in that dim firelight surrounded by family, warmth, and the eternal song of the wind, they found something modern science keeps trying to name: peace. The kind that doesn't come from blackout curtains or melatonin, but from being part of a world that still listened to itself. So tonight we listen too, to their fires, their stories, their dreams. The wind howls outside, a door creaks shut, and somewhere in the dark, a Viking exhales, and the longhouse grows still. Our story begins. Let's set the scene. The sun has vanished behind the fjords, leaving only a thin streak of silver light on the horizon. The sea exhales against the rocks. The gulls have stopped crying. And somewhere inland, past the frozen fields and pine forests, stands a Viking longhouse, its thatched roof glowing faintly from the hearth within. Tonight it's not a hall of warriors, it's a place of rest. The great oak door creaks open, and the smell of smoke, ale and sheep hits you like a warm, rustic hug. Inside it's dim but alive. The longhouse stretches like a wooden ship flipped upside down, beams arching overhead like a ribcage. The floor is packed earth, smooth from years of boots and bare feet. Along the walls, benches and sleeping platforms layered with straw, furs, and occasionally the faint smell of regret. The hearth burns in the centre, flames flickering beneath a vent in the roof that does absolutely nothing to stop the smoke from filling the room. The air is thick but warm, cosy in a hope you like smelling like fire forever kind of way. So, let's talk about Viking beds. Picture a low wooden frame filled with straw, feathers, depending on your social rank. The rich slept on down-filled cushions covered in imported linen. The poor slept on moss and prayed it didn't come with wildlife included. Couples slept side by side under wool blankets, while children, and occasionally the odd cousin who forgot to leave after dinner, squeezed in wherever there was room. There were no separate rooms, no privacy, just one enormous family sleepover every night. But surprisingly, it worked. The shared body heat kept everyone warm through the brutal winters, and the sound of the fire and breathing bodies created what modern scientists would call binaural calm. They wouldn't have used that term, of course. They just called it not freezing to death. The hearth wasn't just for warmth. It was the heart of everything. People cooked over it, told stories around it, and sometimes even healed by it. The Norse believed fire had sacred power, the breath of the god Loki, or a gift from Odin himself. When a Viking child was born, a small ember from the family hearth was used to light the first flame in their cradle room, a sign of life continuing, warmth passed from one soul to another. So even as the night fell and people drifted to sleep, someone always stayed up to tend the coals. Letting the fire die was unthinkable. It meant death, cold, and most terrifying of all, breakfast without hot porridge. The caretaker of the hearth, often the mother or the eldest in the family, would stir the ashes, muttering softly, half prayer, half recipe. Every spark, every glow, every rise of flame meant safety. And in the corner of the room, the smallest children fell asleep to the sound of crackling fire and distant waves. It's late now. The noise of the day has faded. The only sounds are the shuffle of feet, the thump of a log being added to the fire, and the occasional snore that could double as thunder. The goat in the corner lets out a quiet bleat, possibly a nightmare, possibly just dramatic flair. Someone hums softly, maybe an old lullaby from the sagas, maybe just the rhythm of peace. Above, the roof creaks under snow, and tiny sparks rise toward the smoke hole, joining the night sky where stars burn like distant embers. This is Viking sleep, imperfect, smoky, loud, and profoundly human. They didn't need sleep masks or weighted blankets. They had rhythm, routine, repetition. Every night was the same. Bank the fire, share stories, rest until dawn. And somehow, this ritual, this shared surrender to the night, became the heartbeat of the North. The Vikings didn't separate sleep from life. It was part of the same story. Dreams were a continuation of the day, a space where gods might visit or ancestors might whisper. If you dreamed of water, it meant change. If you dreamed of ravens, Odin was watching. If you dreamed of eating too much herring, it probably just meant you ate too much herring. But in their minds, dreams mattered. The longhouse wasn't just a building. It was a vessel between two worlds, waking and sleeping, life and death, human and divine. And that's what made Viking nights so strange, so haunting, and so peaceful all at once. Now, you might be imagining all this through the cozy haze of romantic history. Golden firelight, sleepy warriors, poetic snoring. But in truth, the Viking longhouse was fragrant. Think of a combination of wood smoke, fish, ale, livestock, and about 40 people who haven't invented deodorant yet. And yet, somehow, it became one of the most comforting spaces in their world. Because comfort isn't about perfection, it's about safety, familiarity, belonging. Every time they closed their eyes in that smoky room, they knew. They were alive. They had fire. They had family. And that was enough. It's funny, isn't it? We chase the perfect sleep with gadgets, blackout curtains, and playlists called Calm Viking Hearthfire Sounds. 10 hours. But the people who actually lived it, They had no choice. Their rest came not from silence, but from acceptance. The world outside could rage, storms, spirits, wars, but inside by the fire was peace. Maybe that's the real Viking secret. They didn't fight the night, they belonged to it. The fire burns low now. The longhouse breathes. You can almost hear the weight of 1,000 years of sleep, the creak of timber, the sigh of ash, the heartbeat of rest itself. Maybe the modern world could learn something from that. Maybe all our screens and noise and worry are just the new way of fighting the dark. But here, in this moment, in this longhouse, the darkness is kind. It's a blanket. It's a lullaby. The Vikings knew how to fight, but they also knew how to rest. And sometimes that's the greatest strength. The embers glow, the goat sighs. Someone whispers one last story before dawn, and the north sleeps on. Night has settled completely across the north. The last orange rim of sunlight has faded behind the mountains, and the fjords lie still, dark as melted iron. Inside the longhouse, the air glows with that rich, honey-coloured light that only fire can make. Soft enough to calm the soul, bright enough to keep the shadows at bay. This is the moment between day and sleep. The time when warriors become storytellers, farmers become philosophers, and everyone pretends not to hear the goat chewing on something important. Every Viking evening began and ended with fire, not the wild blaze of raids and battles, but a controlled flame, a heartbeat in the dark. The hearth was tended carefully, reverently. A few logs of driftwood, perhaps a piece of peat, and always a whispered word of thanks to the gods. For the Norse, fire was sacred. It meant survival. To let it die was to invite cold, hunger, and whatever mischievous spirits wandered the night. And there were always spirits. So as families gathered around the flames, someone, usually the eldest woman, wrapped in a heavy wool cloak, would feed the fire one last time before bed. Her movements slow, practiced, each spark rising like a prayer. You can almost see her hands, rough from work, steady from years, lifting the iron tongs, nudging a coal back into place. The rest of the family watches, not out of duty but habit. It's what they've always done. Fire first, then rest. Modern scientists might call this a grounding ritual. The Vikings would have called it keeping the roof from freezing solid. Before sleep there was always something to drink. Sometimes it was mead, honey wine sweet and earthy, fermented in oak barrels that smelled faintly of summer. Other times it was warm milk or water from the well. The act wasn't about indulgence, it was about closure, a way to end the day's hunger, to seal the body's work with a final warmth. Families passed around a single wooden cup, each taking a sip and murmuring a quiet skål, not the loud, boisterous battle cry, but a softer home version. The Norse toasted to things both grand and simple, to health, to family, to not being eaten by wolves this week. It's humbling, isn't it? In an age of gods and empires, their last thought each night wasn't conquest, it was gratitude. Thank you for this warmth. Thank you for this fire. Thank you that we made it to another dawn. And then came the best part, the stories. As the fire dimmed, voices filled the room. Deep, gravelly ones, telling sagas of gods and kings. Soft, musical ones, whispering folk tales to children. 1,000 years before bedtime podcasts, the Vikings invented the spoken lullaby of history. They told of Odin, wandering the world disguised as an old man, of Thor, whose hammer was both weapon and lightning bolt, of Freyja, who wept tears of gold. Each tale was both entertainment and education, a moral lesson, a survival tip, and a way to stay awake just long enough to drift off safely. Think of it like this, where we binge-watch mythological dramas with questionable CGI. They just listen to Grandpa. Same plot, fewer subscription fees. But these stories did more than pass time. They connected generations. A child born into that longhouse could grow up hearing the same legends as their ancestors, and every retelling, every flicker of light, every shift in voice added a little more to the myth. Before bed, belief hung in the air thicker than the smoke. A mother might tie a small Thor's hammer pendant around her son's neck to keep him safe from evil dreams. A father might carve protective runes into the beam above his sleeping place. Even the most practical Viking, the kind who could build a ship with his bare hands and a mild sense of annoyance, wouldn't dare sleep without at least one charm or blessing nearby, and for good reason. Night wasn't just dark, it was alive. The Vikings believed that while they slept, the boundaries between worlds grew thin. Spirits walked, ancestors whispered, dreams became doorways. You didn't close your eyes lightly, you did it with intention. So they prayed, not always to gods, sometimes to the ancestors themselves, in a mixture of fear and faith that maybe, just maybe, someone was still watching over them. There's something comforting about that. The idea that sleep wasn't loneliness. It was joining a world beyond the waking one. And if that's not poetic, I don't know what is. Now, not all Viking rituals were spiritual. Some were, let's say, more personal. The Norse were surprisingly affectionate, at least by medieval standards. In sagas and poems, couples often shared their feelings openly. Love wasn't weakness, it was strength. A chieftain's wife could own land, manage trade, and still be the one to braid her husband's hair before battle. So it's not hard to imagine, in the quiet after the fire faded, two figures lying side by side under thick furs, sharing soft words, small jokes, or dreams of faraway voyages. The walls creaked, the snow fell, and somewhere, between laughter and silence, they found peace. Of course, not every night was romantic. Some nights were filled with arguments about who forgot to bring the goat inside, or complaints like, "Bjorn, stop snoring or I'll feed you to Odin myself." But even in that there was love, the simple human kind that existed long before candles scented like Nordic forest. And then there were the rules. Because in Viking culture, everything, even rest, came with a sense of order. You never went to sleep with your weapons pointing toward you. You never left the fire completely out. You always hung your tools in the same place, otherwise the spirits might borrow them for mysterious nighttime errands. Imagine waking up to find your axe slightly moved and thinking, "Ah, yes, the ghosts were crafting again." Rituals aren't about superstition, really. They're about rhythm, the kind that tells the body, "You've done enough for today." Modern sleep experts say routine helps lower stress and signal rest. The Vikings didn't need science to tell them that. They just felt it. Every flicker of fire, every story told, every prayer whispered into the night. It all told their hearts the same thing. You are safe. You are home. And maybe that's the secret we've lost. We think we need silence to sleep. But what if we need ritual? A little noise, a little warmth, a little reminder that the world keeps turning, even as we close our eyes. The night grows heavier now. Outside, snow begins to fall in lazy spirals, catching the faint light from the doorway. Inside, one by one, the voices fade. The storyteller yawns mid-sentence. A child's hand falls limp over a wooden toy horse. Even the fire seems to breathe slower, content with its own rhythm. Somewhere in the dark, the last wakeful Viking stirs the embers and glances around, the longhouse glowing like the heart of the north itself. And then, with a quiet sigh, even they lie down beside the rest, the warmth of the group carrying them softly into dreams. Outside, the aurora begins, faint streaks of green and violet sliding across the northern sky. For centuries, people would believe those lights were the reflections of Valkyrie's armour, the divine riding across the heavens, but tonight they're just light, gentle, wandering, peaceful. They dance above the world just as the people below once danced to firelight. And in that strange symmetry, sky and earth, waking and dreaming, the Norse found their rhythm. The longhouse is quiet now. Smoke drifts upward, curling like a ghost through the roof vent. For a moment, everything feels suspended. The warmth, the whispers, the world. Then, slowly, the night takes over. The fire sighs, the wind hums against the wooden beams, and one by one, the sleepers vanish into the same dream. A dream of home, of sea, of endless light returning. Outside, the fjord glows faintly beneath the moon, and somewhere in the distance a raven calls. It's not a warning, it's a lullaby. The Vikings didn't fear the dark. They respected it. Because in the dark, in that sacred hush before dawn, they found the one thing warriors rarely had. Peace. Somewhere deep in the longhouse the fire has burned down to quiet embers. The last log pops. The air hums softly with heat. Around the hearth, the Vikings sleep and dream. And if you ask them, those dreams weren't just stories from the mind. They were messages from the gods, the spirits, or the strange invisible threads that tie one life to another. Tonight we step into that half-world, the shadow realm of the Viking imagination, where dreams were both sacred and slightly terrifying. To the Norse, sleep wasn't an end to the day, it was a journey. They believed that when your eyes closed, your soul, the hugger, could wander freely. It could visit distant lands, speak with ancestors, or even spy on enemies. Essentially astral projection, but with more fur and fewer yoga mats. Some thought dreams were sent by Odin himself, the All-Father who wandered the world disguised as a one-eyed traveller, testing mortals in their sleep. Others believed the Fylgja, a spirit animal linked to your fate, appeared in your dreams to warn you of danger or guide you toward destiny. And occasionally, if you were unlucky, the dream visitor wasn't divine at all, but a restless dead thing that hadn't quite realised it was dead, which frankly makes insomnia sound like a smart survival strategy. So what did Vikings actually dream about? The sagas give us clues, and they're surprisingly vivid. In one, a farmer dreams of a great wave swallowing his fields, and days later, a flood arrives. In another, a young woman dreams of a hawk soaring away, never to return. The next morning, her lover is gone to sea. These weren't bedtime entertainment. They were omens. If your dream was strange, you didn't shrug it off. You told someone about it, often at breakfast over stale bread and fish stew. The community would gather, scratch their beards, and debate what it meant. A raven in your dream, that's Odin's blessing. A wolf, that's trouble. A goat singing in a meadow, probably something you ate. Dreams were shared, interpreted, discussed like divine gossip, and in a way they were, the social network of the soul. The Norse world was full of thresholds, doorways, gates, bridges, and none were more mysterious than the one between sleep and waking. They saw dreams as small versions of journeys to other worlds. The god Odin himself was said to travel the realms in dreamlike states, learning hidden knowledge from the dead and the gods alike. Shamans called Seder practitioners entered trances through rhythm, chanting, or herbs, letting their minds wander through unseen dimensions. It was, in essence, ancient neuroscience, exploring the subconscious before Freud ever grew a beard and started asking about your childhood. But unlike modern psychology, the Vikings didn't think dreams came from you. They came to you, carried on the wind, brought by spirits, delivered by gods. You weren't the author, you were the recipient, and your only job was to listen. In the morning, after the fire was stoked, and the room filled with the smell of porridge and wood smoke, people shared what they'd seen in their sleep. Some longhouses even had a designated dream interpreter, usually an older woman, wise in stories and patient with nonsense. She'd listen, nod, and say things like, "The man with the fish head is not your enemy, it is your tax collector," or, "If you dream of falling, it means you must plant barley early this season." Her interpretations weren't random. They were woven from myth, weather patterns, and social instinct. In a world where there were no forecasts, no science, and no therapy, dreams were both entertainment and strategy. Every household used them to decide when to travel, when to trade, even when to marry. Dream management, you might say, was a full-time job. Some dreams, however, carried a heftier weight. In the sagas, kings, warriors, and poets all experienced visions that predicted their fate. The poet Egil Skallagrimsson dreamed of ravens flying over his house the night before his brother died. The saga of Gisli Sursen tells of a man haunted by a dream woman who foretells his death in such detail that it's almost cinematic, down to the weapon, the hill, the hour. These weren't symbolic, they were destiny. And while we might interpret that today as anxiety or intuition, the Vikings saw it as divine inevitability. A true dream wasn't to be changed, only accepted. And that acceptance, that calm in the face of fate, is perhaps the most Viking thing imaginable. Of course, not every dream was divine. Some were darker. The Norse word for nightmare, martröd, literally means attack by a mare. They imagined nightmares as actual beings, invisible creatures that sat on your chest while you slept, stealing your breath and sanity. Think sleep paralysis, but with better mythology. These shadow creatures, called Mara, were sometimes said to be witches, sometimes restless souls, sometimes even neighbours you'd annoyed one too many times. If someone had repeated night terrors, people might scatter iron nails near their bed, or hang a horse's skull in the rafters, which, honestly, would give me nightmares. The logic was simple: scare the dark with something darker. And you know what? It probably worked, because the human brain, as it turns out, is very obedient to ritual, and very bad at arguing with superstition in the dark. Here's the fascinating part. Modern researchers studying dream patterns have found that early societies like the Norse did dream differently. Their lives were more dangerous, their days more physical, their nights darker. In response, their brains produced more vivid, story-like dreams, full of symbols, warnings, and narrative logic. In a sense, dreaming was their subconscious way of solving problems the daylight couldn't. So when they said, "The gods spoke to me," what they might have meant was, my brain worked the night shift. Dreaming for them was intelligence, not fantasy. It was the mind adapting, inventing, surviving. They didn't dismiss dreams as nonsense. They treated them like maps. And maybe that's why their stories still feel so alive, because they were born from minds that believed imagination was reality, just one step removed. The Norse afterlife wasn't simple heaven or hell. It was a series of realms, each with its own atmosphere, its own dream logic. The brave went to Valhalla, the endless hall of feasting. The peaceful went to Folkvanger, the meadow of Freya. The lost wandered hell, a place of mist, not torment, just distance. To dream of any of these places was a kind of preview. People spoke softly the next morning, sharing such dreams with awe, as though they'd glimpsed the great beyond and come back with stories no one else could tell. In this way, the boundary between dream and death blurred beautifully. Falling asleep was, in miniature, a rehearsal for eternity. There's another layer here, one historians rarely talk about. For the Norse, dreams also preserved memory. When you dreamed of an ancestor, you weren't imagining them. You were remembering them so vividly that they returned. Dreaming kept the dead alive. It was how love and loss shared the same bed. That's why sagas and myths so often begin with someone saying, "I dreamed last night of someone I knew long ago." It wasn't nostalgia. It was spiritual continuity. In the North, remembrance was immortality, and the only place where you could truly meet the past was in your dreams. The rooster crows. The sky lightens from black to pale silver. Smoke still curls from the hearth. Someone stretches, groaning. Another stirs the fire back to life. And across the longhouse people begin to murmur about their dreams. "I saw a ship covered in ice," says one. "I heard music in the trees," says another. No one laughs. No one says, "It was just a dream." Because to the Vikings, dreams were part of the morning. They were breakfast for the soul, and as the day begins, smoke rising, snow melting on the roof, the cycle continues. Sleep, dream, wake, tell, repeat. The rhythm of the North, the heartbeat of a civilization that never really stopped listening to what the night had to say. If you think about it, they weren't that different from us. We still dream of things we don't understand, fears, hopes, memories that slip away when the alarm clock screams. We still wake up trying to make sense of what the night whispered. Maybe we've just changed the language. Instead of Odin, we say algorithm. Instead of runes, we scroll through feeds. But the longing to understand ourselves, to find meaning in the dark, that's ancient. That's Viking. So tonight, when you close your eyes, remember them. The dreamers of the North, the poets and warriors who listened to silence until it spoke back. The night before battle was always the quietest. No swords clanging, no laughter, just the hiss of the sea, the crackle of a single fire, and the weight of thought. For the Vikings, courage didn't come from chaos. It came from calm. They believed that a still mind made the strongest warrior. And so even on the eve of violence, they practiced peace. Tonight, we're not watching warriors fight. We're watching them wait. The stars above are sharp and cold. The ships rock gently in the fjord, their dragon prows silhouetted like sleeping beasts. On shore, men and women share silence, broken only by the sound of breath. This, right here, is the true Viking heart. Not rage, not plunder, but the moment before, the sacred stillness before dawn. Every longhouse had a rule. The fire must never go out. Even when families travelled, they carried embers wrapped in moss, warm, smouldering, alive. Because fire wasn't just heat, it was lineage, a spark handed down through generations from hearth to hearth. The flame in a Viking home might have been burning for decades, older than the children born beside it. And when someone died, their ashes were often placed near that same fire as if returning them to the source. The fire never sleeps, they said. It's such a small phrase, but it meant everything. It meant, our people endure, our stories don't fade. Even when the world grows cold, something in us stays warm. The Vikings feared little, not death, not storm, not even the gods' judgment. What they feared most was to be forgotten. They believed a person truly died only when their name was no longer spoken. So every night around the hearth they told stories of ancestors, lovers, warriors, and fools. Each tale was a spark thrown into eternity. And even now, over 1,000 years later, we still speak those names, which means somewhere in the language of myth, they're still alive. Think about that next time someone says history is boring. These people carved eternity with fire and words. They built immortality one bedtime story at a time. The north was harsh, icy winds, short summers, endless winters that could starve a man's soul. But the Vikings found beauty in it. They believed the cold made you honest. That hardship purified the heart. A cosy longhouse wasn't comfort. It was victory. Every log burned, every cloak stitched, every bowl of stew shared was an act of defiance against the frost. They didn't just survive the dark, they befriended it. Maybe that's why their culture feels so alive to us. It was built not on fear, but on adaptation. They didn't ask the world to be easier. They learned how to thrive within its storms, which honestly sounds like pretty good life advice. The sagas tell us something funny. The same men who could swing axes like thunder also wrote poetry. They composed verses to their lovers, their kings, their gods. Some were tender, some were threatening, some were both. Because poetry wasn't decoration, it was currency. A chieftain could forgive an insult if the poem about it was good enough. A warrior could secure his legacy with a single perfect line. And those who couldn't fight could still speak, wielding words sharper than any sword. It's strange, isn't it? The Vikings, famous for destruction, were also builders of language. Even their war songs sound like lullabies now. Slow, rhythmic, heavy with longing. Maybe the truth is this. The North didn't raise brutes, it raised poets who carried axes. When the raids ended and the ships were dragged ashore for the last time, the world moved on. But for centuries afterward, travellers wrote about the same thing, the peace of the North, how its people, descendants of warriors, built cathedrals, studied law, and treated hospitality as holy. How the same hands that once wielded swords now carved delicate runes into wood and stone. The Viking Age ended, but its soul didn't. The stillness we began with, that candlelit quiet in the longhouse, never left. It just grew quieter, deeper, wiser. That's what happens to every civilization. The rage burns out, and what remains is rhythm. The heartbeat of those who stayed behind, the echo of those who dreamed of something more than war. If you listen closely on a cold night near the fjords, not with your ears, but with whatever listens inside the heart, you can still hear it, a faint sound, like oars dipping into dark water, the rhythm of a people who never stopped moving. Some say it's the sea, some say it's the wind through old wooden beams. I think it's memory, the sound of stories refusing to die. And that, my friend, is the truest kind of immortality. The fire in the longhouse burns low again. The last storyteller closes their eyes. Outside, the aurora ripples across the sky, green silk unravelling over black velvet. The sea breathes in its sleep. The stars look down, older than any saga, brighter than any torch. The north is quiet now, but not empty. The whispers remain, tucked between pages carved into wood, echoing through centuries. And as the last ember glows, we realise something simple. The Vikings are gone, but the warmth they left, The fire of their spirit still flickers wherever someone listens to history instead of rushing past it. So if your eyes are heavy, let them close. Dream not of war, but of home, of ships rocking gently under stars, of laughter behind carved doors, of hands tending a fire that never sleeps. You've travelled far enough for one night. Rest well, traveller of time. The north will still be here in the morning. Good night.